listening to Opening the Harp Chakra, the podcast, bringing you beautiful, healing, magical harp music and talking with the artists that create it. So this is the first episode of Season 2 of the podcast. We have a new year and a special guest born and raised in Edinburgh, Scotland, now based out of Brooklyn, New York. Maeve Gilchrist plays the harp exceptionally well. She writes and produces music exceptionally well. She tours all over the world, teaches at Berklee College of Music, has written books. I could spend the entire podcast, Maeve, just listing your accomplishments, but I want to talk to you. So welcome, Maeve Gilchrist.
Thank you, Jay. It's lovely to be here.
It's so good to have you. I met you, I think 15 years ago or so at the Icons Irish Festival in Canton, Massachusetts. We were performing together in the Harp tent with Anya Minogue, and I let you borrow my tuner.
Oh, thank you. I do you know, I just came back from Scotland where I was visiting my parents, and my dad, even now, 35 years on, the question he always asks when I'm about to leave somewhere with my harp is, have you got your tuner? So it's an ongoing problem for me.
I understand. I'm going to want that back eventually. So, Maeve, how long ago did you start to play the harp, and what led you to the harp?
Well, I've been playing the harp since I was 8 years old. And even as a young child, it was very much on my radar. My mother is Irish, from Tipperary. I was born in Scotland to a Scottish father, but my mother's originally from Tipperary, Ireland, and two of her sisters are professional Irish harp players, and I have cousins who play the harp. So it was very much on my radar as an instrument. I was certainly inspired by what my aunts did, and that paired with the fact that my parents' community were very involved in the traditional music scene going on in Scotland, and the harp being a dominant instrument in that type of music meant that it wasn't such an alien choice for me to pick up the harp. I grew up going to fèises and kind of youth traditional music gatherings. And I started with the piano, but I soon moved on to the harp. And actually, I have a twin sister. And originally, my parents thought that I would be musical. They thought that I would be musical because I wouldn't shut up ever. And there was a piano in the house, and I was constantly going over there and plonking away on the keys. So they thought, we'll give Maeve the violin, because we think she'll be able to make it sound good. And we'll give Orna, my long-suffering twin sister, we'll give Orna the harp, because anything on the harp sounds beautiful. And I kicked up a big fuss because I wanted to play the harp, and my sister very kindly said, you can play the harp, Maeve, I'll play the violin. And little did they know, she turned out to be a phenomenal fiddle player and violinist. And right away, I sunk into the harp like a familiar comforter. I mean, it just felt right.
It's funny how many people feel that way about the harp, like it's a friend and a companion.
Yes. Oh, my whole life. Yes.
Well, we're so glad you took that path. You released a lot of music, but in 2020, you came up with a CD called the Harpweaver. Now, is there a significance to that title, that word, Harpweaver?
There is. And this album is kind of the result of many strands that I was interested in kind of coming together. For a long time, I'd wanted to make an album of my own music and under my own production. And I was very keen to utilize some of these slightly old-fashioned melodies that I've always loved, these charming music hall-esque style of melodies, the type of tune that I may have heard on my aunt in Dublin's old record player, or those beautiful songs sung by the Irish tenors at the turn of the century, the music that would have been played in immigrant music halls in New York, Chicago, Boston at the turn of the century. There's something about those melodies which just really gets me, and it got me thinking about this idea of artistic nostalgia, how music can make people feel things even if they don't have a direct connection with it. And of course, as a Celtic musician, having travelled all across the world, I've been amazed at the power of the music to touch people, even if they don't have a direct connection to the Celtic Isles. So I wanted to utilize these melodies when I came across a poem by the American poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, who was kind of a jazz age celebrity. She was a total rock star, if you can imagine, in the 20s and the 30s. This woman, the first woman actually to win a Pulitzer Prize in America, she would travel the States and sell out venues such as the Hollywood Bowl in California multiple nights in a row, just reading her poetry. So I was kind of astounded by the reach that she'd had with her words. And I was just flipping through a book of hers, and I came across a poem, a very famous poem of hers called The Ballad of the Harpweaver. And it's really a story of a mother and her son in very bleak economic circumstances. The mother is trying to provide for the child, keep him warm, keep food on the table, and she's selling everything in the house. And the only thing that she can't sell is a harp with a woman's head that sits in the corner. And eventually she turns to the harp and she starts to play, weaving from the strings. Sorry, this is a spoiler alert. Weaving from the strings clothes to keep her son warm. And on one hand, it's a very sad tale, but when I read it, I was struck by the power of maternal love. And also I loved how the instrument was illuminated as the provider. So often as technical musicians, we're really focused on kind of conquering our instruments, pulling the sound out of the strings, when I believe it needs to be a much more symbiotic relationship to reach our fullest potential. And really, when I look at the harp and what it's given to my life and to me, it's brought me from one side of the world to another. It's given me a wonderful, rich community of musicians and friends. And it's brought me income and opportunities I've never dreamed of. So the harp really has provided for me, and I just thought that was beautifully put in this poem. After that, I started trying to find recordings of her reading her own poetry, and you'll hear a little when we hear one of these tracks. But she recites in that incredibly engaging and charming kind of transatlantic accent, and it gave me that feeling of knowing her words, even though I don't and I didn't, and that just tied beautifully in with this melodic material that I was interested in at the time, and it all kind of came together in this recording.
All right, so let's listen to the Harpweaver.
Son, said my mother, when I was knee-high, you've need of clothes to cover you, and not a rag have I. There's nothing in the house to make a boy breeches, nor shears to cut a cloth with, nor thread to take stitches. There's nothing in the house but a loaf end of rye, and a harp with a woman's head nobody will buy. And she began to cry.
That was the Harpweaver, the title track from the latest release from today's guest, Maeve Gilchrist. I love that, Maeve. That is so nice, the way you worked in just the words and the musical themes. Just
Thank you.
beautiful. If you go to maevegilchristmusic.com and you click on the link that says Learn, there is quite a few options to learn. There's online workshops, handout sheet music, and private lessons. And I've actually attended some of those online workshops that you do on the weekend afternoons, and they're awesome. What inspired you to do this?
Well, thank you. This has been, I'm sure many of the harp players and other musicians out there will agree, this has been the year of teaching, and I'll talk about that more later. But the Harp Talk series, which is this kind of free monthly workshop, I started about 3 or 4 years ago. I had just left the Berkeley faculty. I wasn't doing any more teaching. I loved and continue to love being a part of the Berkeley kind of extended network of guest lecturers. But the commute was getting too much from New York to Boston. And I wanted to carve out a little more creative space for writing. So I wasn't teaching at all for about 7 years. But when I was on the road performing, I met so many harp players, especially in rural areas, who didn't have access to a teacher. So I started these monthly workshops with the idea that it was just a platform to help cultivate an online harping community. People could bring any questions that they had. I'd often provide an arrangement and kind of talk through my process of arranging. And I mean, it was and still is a very informal type of event. And it's just my living room and me chatting away. But it's really created this wonderful community of very forgiving harp students and colleagues. And it's really kept me going during this pandemic time. I stopped even the Harp Talks actually last August for almost a year. My schedule was just getting too busy. But when the pandemic struck last March, I started bi-monthly it up again. And people are at home. They have a lot more time on their hands. They want to engage in community and in learning in a safe way. And it just made so much sense. And the community turned out with a bang. So those have been really fun. They're very informal. They're free, but for anyone who comes along, they can purchase the music that I'm teaching. I create handouts, and they're available on my website under the upcoming for the handouts. Once the pandemic hit, of course, I mean, 2 years of bookings just got cancelled. Like everybody else, I had about 2 weeks of utter panic. and then like everyone else, I started to reinvent my life, to renegotiate a different professional landscape for myself. And I was so grateful, not just for the Harp Talk workshops, but for the community that had been formed through that platform, because I had access to harp players who wanted to learn privately as well. So since March, I've been running a private studio, which has been just so much fun. That runs on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I also started to run, in October, I ran the first online rhythm intensive for harp players. And that spurred from a book that I wrote a few years ago on hand separation and rhythmic focus. I meet so many harpers, Jay, who tell me that they think rhythm is their weakness, that they don't have a strong sense of time. And I think the biggest obstacle to that is the fact that people don't know how to practice rhythm. It's a much more conceptual element of their playing. So I designed a 4-week course that I ran in October. It was very popular. It sold out within a day. And so I ran it. I'm running it again right now. Again, sold out within a day, which really just showcases the need for this kind of work with harp players. It doesn't just help them gain confidence in their sense of time, but it helps give them ideas for collaborating. It helps them give names and vocabulary to stuff that they're already hearing. So much about grooving is about having confidence that you know where the pulse is, you know how to lay down the groove. So that's really what these courses have been focused on. And I've also been teaching with the ensemble Silk Road that I work with at various institutions. It's been incredible. I mean, it's really, it's so new for me, and sometimes it's exhausting, but I learn so much from my students, and I look at my own playing now through an entirely different lens than I did before March.
I like what you said about the rhythm, because when you play the harp by yourself, left to your own devices, you can just float off into the others and just lose all sense of rhythm, which is fine, but sometimes it's nice to really connect to that sense of rhythm. So I'm glad you have that and brought that up, because I think it's an important point.
Yes, I mean, the harp does that ethereal, ambient thing like nothing else. It's undeniable. But I think often we're stereotyped as a one-trick pony, and I think the harp has an incredibly diverse range of sounds and musical capabilities. It can be a driving rhythmic force, or it can be a romantic, beautiful, haunting sound. But why not explore all parts of it?
Everything, right, exactly. Hey, let's play some more music from your CD, Harpweaver, the Harpweaver. This piece I really like, The Storm. Can you tell us about the piece and introduce it?
I think I have an obsession with water. I grew up on the sea in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I now live on the Hudson River, and I like to be near water at all times. This piece was part of a suite that I wrote for a great group in Ireland called Music Generation, which is a government-funded organisation that promotes the learning and teaching of traditional music to kids in public schools and supplements or simply pays for lessons for public school children. And I started working with the branch in Laois a good few years ago, maybe about 4 years ago. And I've been going a couple of times a year ever since. And in this tiny town of about 22,000 people in the middle of the country, there's 107 harp players, if you can believe it, mainly due to the Herculean efforts of the harp teacher, Siobhan Butler, out there. And 2 years ago, they commissioned me to write a piece for the harp orchestra, and it's called White Horses. The white horses being the waves of the sea. And I looking at these girls ranging from ages 4 up to about 18 or 19, I think they didn't realize perhaps the power that they held by way of their instruments and their fierce musicality. And I loved the kind of parallel of their fluid femininity and their sheer force, similar to that of the ocean. So The Storm was the first piece in that suite, and it's kind of a foreboding, driving piece of music. say the winter was bad that year. Fuel was scarce and food was dear. A wind with a wolf's head howled about our door, and we burned up the chairs and sat on the floor. All that was left us was a chair we couldn't break, and the harp with a woman's head nobody would take for song or pity's sake. The night before Christmas, I cried with the cold. I cried myself to sleep like a 2-year-old. And in the deep night, I felt my mother rise and stare down upon me with love in her eyes.
So from the latest CD from Maeve Gilchrist, the Harpweaver, that is The Storm, so intensely satisfying. That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm in Massachusetts. I listen to GBH radio, and of course you're involved in that through your work with Brian O'Donovan. I know you're the assistant music director for the Christmas Celtic Sojourn. Can you talk a little bit about your connection with Brian and some of the work that you've been doing and are planning to do?
Yes, I mean Brian O'Donovan is a powerhouse. He's a tireless advocate for Celtic music and just good music of all kinds around New England. I've worked with him now since 2009 on the Christmas Celtic show every year, and more recently as the co-artistic director of the new Rockport Celtic Music Festival, which had its first year in 2019 and was really more focused on the kind of outer fringes of Celtic music, the cross-genre collaboration, new music coming from current Celtic musicians. And it was just a wonderfully joyous festival. It felt fresh and new, and that's the more recent endeavour. But in many other things, I've worked on his St. Patrick's Day Sojourn. We share a great love of poetry and curiosity about the pairing of words and music. So he's a mentor and a friend and a boss to me.
Just before I was speaking to you today, I was just looking through Facebook and I saw that he had done a review of your CD, and I haven't had a chance to look or listen to it yet, but I understand he really did a nice job reviewing the new CD.
He did, yeah. He's you know, words are so important to me. My father is a writer. He's a journalist and a music critic, and I've grown up with a real reverence for words and the power of poetry and stories. And this album, the Harpweaver, is really the first time on a recording that I've explored that more fully. And working with Brian, he brings such a love of poetry and his own poetic sense to everything he does. And that it's a WGBH podcast about the album, and he really has crafted a beautiful piece.
I like him because it's not just he has a great voice and he understands music. Music is in his family, it's in his blood, and he not only knows about it, he knows of it, and I think that makes all the difference in the world.
And he loves it, truly. Mm-hmm. I don't think I know anyone who loves music more than Brian O'Donovan.
And so nice. Every time I'm at a festival, I see him, he comes right up, says hello, shakes my hand. It's great. He's just a wonderful person. So I would like to feature one more selection from the CD, The Harpweaver. I think this is my favorite of all of them. It's The Calm. So what inspired this?
Well, after the storm, there must be the calm. So this is actually also a tune that was from that suite, originally written for 36 harp players. It's pared down to just one. It's just me on this track and my great friend Kyle Sana, who's playing some very beautiful, subtle electric guitar, sustained notes in the background. But I agree. I think this one might be my favorite for all the notes on this record, and there are many notes, and I love to explore busy textures and kind of walls of sound, but I also love space and peace within music, and I think the breath is incredibly important to have a presence in order to enable you to enjoy the other stuff there. So this is just a little moment of calm It's exactly what it says on the tin.
Maeve Gilchrist from the Harpweaver, and we've agreed it's both our favorite songs from the CD, The Calm. So thank you for sharing that. What are your plans for 2021? What do you got going on?
Well, it's very unknown at the moment. There's bazillions of possibilities. There's lots of contracts with lots of asterisks surrounding firm commitments because we just don't know yet. For the immediate future, spring of 2021, I'm continuing to teach a lot. I'm working at the College of the Holy Cross, doing an online residency, exploring the idea of heritage and how our past can help us hone our own voices. And we're using the Harpweaver as kind of a vehicle to explore that with. I'll be working at Boston College with Silk Road, team teaching with an incredible Syrian Armenian artist called Kevork Murad. And I'll be doing my own individual teaching. I'm producing a couple of records. I mean, it's always busy, Jay. It's incredible to
Sure.
me. It's
Excellent.
incredible that the world keeps turning and we just adjust and we are resilient. In regards to the summer and the fall, we're still waiting. I'm hopeful by the fall that there will be performances in some shape or form happening. I'm hopeful that even towards the end part of the summer, even in a small way, we'll be able to start sharing music again live. But meanwhile, I am just going to hunker down, continue to be grateful for the Harp community that has sustained me through this time, and work on some new music for you all.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Grateful that you still have the music. I feel the same way. Looking forward to playing again more frequently, but grateful that we can still do it and we adapt through this time. So, well, if people want to stay up to date with what's happening, they can go to your website. I'm going to include a link here in our show notes to your website, maevegilchristmusic.com, and also in the show notes we'll have your YouTube and your Facebook address so people can just link and find out what's up, what's happening, what's new. So,
That's wonderful. Thank you.
thank you. This has been such a nice chat. I've been looking forward to chatting with you for some time. I'm glad that you're here for the first episode of the new season. That's really nice. Thank you for joining me for that. And thank you for doing everything you do with your harp music, your teaching, and all that. You're a great addition to the world of music.
Thanks, Jay. It's been great to be here.
Thank you so much. If you have questions, guest suggestions, email me, openingtheharpchakra@yahoo.com. We've included links to PayPal and Venmo if you'd like to contribute to the production of this podcast as well. Thank you for doing that. Please subscribe, please share, please tell your friends. And in the coming weeks, we have more wonderful, beautiful, excellent harp music from around the world. I'm Jay Michaels. Thank you so much for being here. Peace. Namaste.